Hello, I'm an old fart, and I have a guilty pleasure, which is I like knives. I collect small folding pocket knives, mainly non-threatening gentlemen's knives, and you've been wandering on a tour with me through that collection of knives. I'm not an expert or an official representative of anybody. I just like knives. So today we're going to have a look at something a little out of the ordinary for my connection. We're going to have a look at this. This is a SpyderCo Tenacious. And why this knife? I've said many times, I collect small folding gentlemen's pocket knives. I call them NTGKs, non-threatening gentlemen's knives. And this isn't. This isn't non-threatening. It's not a gentleman's knife. It's not small. It is folding. It gets that right. So why this? This is a low end, a budget knife, a utility knife, an inexpensive knife. It's big and heavy and sturdy and a tool. Pretty good for those things, but not what I collect. So why this? Well, two reasons. And each of those reasons is represented by another knife. First, the Ontario Rat 2. This is not what I collect, but I wanted to have this in my collection because it's a budget knife, and I wanted a knife to show people who ask me for advice or to loan to people who I don't trust to care for knives. So this is one of those. This is a budget knife. If people want to see what's an inexpensive, okay knife look like, I can show them two quite different styles. So there's one reason to have this in the collection. Budget knife to show people. Here's the other reason. Reviewed this knife a while ago. This is a Kershaw Leek, and this is really not what I collect. I don't particularly like the blade design. A bunch of other safety's on. A bunch of other things about it that I didn't like, but I do like it. I like it a lot, and the reason I like it is it's a rescue dog. It's a knife that I got cheap, in terrible condition, and fixed it up and learned how to do that. And this is one of those. This is a rescue dog. It was in poor condition when I got it. The mechanism was really bad. It was tight, almost couldn't open it. Gritty, unpleasant feeling to work. The blade was in incredibly bad shape. We'll come back to that in a minute. And there were some other issues, like a stripped screw that I had to remove with a special tool, and one screw that is not actually the right screw for the hole, and is too short and doesn't actually engage in the metal, and so had been glued in place, so I replaced that. So there were a lot of things wrong with this knife. That is the reason that it came so cheap. So that's another reason to have it in the collection, because it turns out that for me, restoring bad condition knives with some basic maintenance and getting them back into decent working condition is actually quite enjoyable. I enjoy doing that. So for this one, I did a refurb. I disassembled it, cleaned it, greased it, lubed it, replaced the damage and the wrong screws, sharpened it, and rust inhibited it. And I enjoyed doing that. That's another reason that it's in the collection, even though it is by no means a non-threatening gentleman's knife. So let's do the formal description. This is a SpyderCo company Tenacious model. They make a bunch of models or submodels, I guess, of Tenaciouses. This is the basic G10 black model, the nothing fancy model. Mechanism, it is a Spidey hole opener. So, I guess you'd call that a thumb stud opener, except there's no thumb stud. So you use the Spidey hole with your thumb to swing it open. That's good for a nice slow open. It works quite well, and in particular, this knife is big enough that there's enough room for the geometry. I don't have any trouble swinging that around in that trajectory. Some smaller knives, that can be quite awkward. You can also flick this knife open. It's not as easy as it is with the PM2. And now I'm failing. There we go. Okay, see, the problem is that it's difficult enough that you have to set up to get it to work. There we are. And, anything that I have to stop and prepare myself for and set up is not going to happen very often. But it's interesting to know that you can. You can flick it. Okay. And here's something surprising. Here's a SpyderCo PM2, a knife that costs about 10 times as much. I don't know, 6 times as much. And guess what? This knife is easier to open and more pleasant. So, funny that. So anyway, that's the mechanism. Good, slow opening, nice lock. It's a liner lock knife, and it locks nice and securely, even when you open it slowly. Some knives, I find that if you open them slowly, you get a partial lock. And to get a secure lock, you have to really fling them open. Not this one. Let's talk about the size. This is actually a big knife. It's sort of a large medium knife or a small large knife. And it's not just long, as we'll see in a second, but it's also wide and it's heavy. So it just comes out feeling big. Let's do the standard measurements. The most important one, of course, the pocket calculator measurement. It is about 1.1 pocket calculators in length. By the way, somebody complained to me and said, "What the hell are you doing using the pocket calculator as a measurement scale? Like, what is wrong with you? People don't know what that is." And I said, well, I was going to do this. I tried using this as a standard measuring scale. In fact, it looks more like a ruler. The problem is that it's a log scale, and so it was making the measurements very confusing. On a log scale, differences aren't very big or are very big. They're amplified in one direction. So it didn't really seem to be a practical measuring tool, and so the pocket calculator. So live with it. Now, compare it to a couple of knives, because people do. Don't know why. It is just, again, to make the point that this is a big knife. There's a Benchmade mini griptilian, much bigger than a mini griptilian. Like, we're into big knife territory. But if you take a knife that is considered big, say a 940, it's a little bit smaller than the 940, just a little. And if you put it next to a PM2, it's much smaller than the PM2. So it's smaller than a big knife and bigger than a medium knife. The PM2 is an interesting comparison, by the way. So the PM2 is much longer, but look at the blades. The blades are almost identical. In fact, I think the cutting blade on the PM2, yes, it is. The blade on the PM2 is actually shorter. That's because the PM2 is a kind of a mutant of a knife. It's a huge handle. So anyway, there you go. It's a big, medium-sized knife. It's also a heavy knife, 115 grams. There's nothing lightweight used in it. It's steel and G10, no exotic materials. So it's heavier than a PM2, even though the PM2 is bigger. It is lighter than the large Sebenza, the large Inkosi, but only a little bit. So this is a heavy knife. So big, heavy. There we go. What else can we say about it? The blade. The blade is made from a steel with a very long name. It's a HCR13 MOV steel. You can see that written down on the side here, and it's so long that they actually had to break it into multiple lines. HCR13 MOV. Didn't know much about that. Looked it up. It is a cheap Chinese steel, more or less equivalent to AUS 8. Budget steel used on inexpensive knives. And that is how this is an inexpensive knife. And HCR13 MOV is okay. It's not a premium steel. So it's, less of everything. It's less edge retention, less corrosion resistance. It will require significant care. It's going to have to be sharpened more often, cleaned, kept dry, maybe some rust inhibitor. I did that. There's a thin film now of frog lube rust inhibitor on the blade. So it's going to need care. That's probably why it was so dull. But it's okay. It cuts things. The blade is the typical SpyderCo leaf shape. I'm not sure what the official name for that blade shape is. Is that a spear point? Anyway, I don't really like it very much. I don't like the basic shape of the traditional SpyderCo blades being really fat at the back to make room for the hole, and then this weird leaf shape. I think they're aggressive looking, and I try not to collect aggressive knives, and I think they're ugly. Full flat grind, and again, strangely, with most SpyderCos, no sharpening choil. So to sharpen to the edge, you do get some interference from the shoulder, but it is what it is. So budget blade. The body, steel liners. The scales are textured G10, which is actually okay. You get a good grip from the textured G10. It's not fancy, but it holds well and it's practically indestructible. There is a clip is a basic stainless steel clip. And again, it's inexpensive stainless steel. I don't know exactly what it is, but it's not very stainless. This one had rust on the underside and rust along the edges, and I've steel wooled that off and put rust abrasion or inhibitor on it to the best I can, but it is corroded and pitted a little bit. So again, it's going to require some care. It has the standard SpyderCo 4 choices for mounting, so you can have it on left or right side and tip up or tip down. So there's 4 places to mount the clip. It came mounted here for tip down carry, and I moved it to this end because all my knives are tip up, and I didn't want to be confused by having one that sat differently in my pocket. There is a hole for a lanyard, and it's really weird. The lanyard hole goes through the center of the clip, so there's a hole in the clip, and if you move the clip to this side, the hole surrounds the pivot pin, and that's weird. I think it's ugly. I think it has kind of a steampunk look. I expect to see a steam pipe coming out of there or something like that. Piece of hemp rope. So anyway, there is a clip, functional, shallow carry, not attractive, and not very rust proof. And there is a lanyard hole. Is the knife ambidextrous? Well, for opening and for the clip, yes, lots of options. For opening, sure. That lovely Spidey hole opening you can do. I don't know if I can do, but no, I can't do. One can do that with either hand, and you can close it easily with either hand. But of course, being a liner lock, you can't operate the locking mechanism with either hand. It's really designed to be done with your right hand, pushing with the thumb. Okay. With the left hand, I guess lefties can learn to do that, but boy, it's awkward, and I wouldn't want to have to. So I will say it's not ambidextrous for closing. Manufactured, it's made in China, says so on the side of the blade. Don't know where. There are some, I know some people have a problem with knives made in China. There are some high-end, high-quality Chinese manufacturers, people like We and Bestech and even some of the Kaisers. This is not one of those. Although, except for the cheap materials, it's actually pretty good. Mechanically, it's okay. I shouldn't diss the manufacturer, but it is a budget knife. Did I say that already? It's a budget knife. So let's go through some likes and dislikes. What I like, well, I've already mentioned a couple of things. I like that it's a rescue dog. It needed help, and it was repairable. It's a low-price knife in any case, and being in crappy condition, it was a bargain price. And so I enjoyed that. I enjoyed rescuing a knife and putting it back into service. Next, I like the mechanism. That's actually quite pleasant. I don't want to like it, but it's nice and smooth, and it swings open easily, slowly, and has a good lock, and it actually feels very nice. And it closes safely. When starting to close it, the heel of the blade contacts my thumb and stops. So if I'm having a moment of carelessness, and I have a lot of those, I'm not going to slide the blade closed on my thumb. It gives me a time to get out of the way. So I like the mechanism. And for actually cutting with, it's comfortable. There's lots of room, lots of finger room, good thumb rest, shaped thumb rest. So an easy knife to get a decent grip on for cutting. What I don't like, well, I'm sorry, it's kind of a long list. First, I know this is going to annoy some people, but I think it's ugly. Let's not pick on the blade yet. I think the clip is hideous. It's big, it's bright, it's very shallow. So this stuff sticks out of your pocket, including this bright triangle of metal with 4 screws and this hole through it with a copper steam pipe coming out of it. So it really calls attention to itself, and I like inconspicuous. Already said I don't really like the classic SpyderCo blade shape. I think they're threatening. And I don't think it's got lots of stuff on it. There's holes and hardware everywhere. I mean, look at this. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 screws, and 12 holes. There really isn't a presentation side. I mean, the one side has the clip and the other side doesn't, but on a lot of knives, the so-called presentation side is a little cleaner and simpler. Not this. This is an industrial knife. So don't really like that. I said I refurbed it and enjoyed that, and I did, but I must say it wasn't an easy knife to refurb. It wasn't easy to get it open. A lot of the screws were jammed into these standoffs that are double-sided threaded, so it wasn't easy to get open. And it was especially not easy to get the tension right. There's a very fine point between so tight that it's hard to open and so loose that there's noticeable blade play and slop. So it wasn't easy to find a good tension in putting it back together. And I must say, it wasn't easy to figure out what to lubricate. Taking this thing apart, I've never seen another knife like this. It runs on phosphor bronze washers, and there are 3 washers in there. So I wouldn't expect any odd number. But anyway, 3. So there are 2 on this side that just stack on top of each other. I can see that doesn't seem like a bad idea. Like there's more surfaces to move against each other there. So I, lubricated both sides of both washers. And then on this side, there's only 1. And why? Why not 2? Like maybe there were 2 and 1 was lost, but I don't think so. It didn't look like it had ever been opened. And the washer on this side is smaller, considerably smaller than the washers on this side. Of course, when I opened the knife, they all just fell out. So I found myself thinking, okay, why are these not all the same size? And it took a while to figure out why. It's because the washer on this side impacts the liner lock if it's full size. So the smaller washer has to go on this side to make room for the liner lock. So it just seems a little bit kludgy. Continuing on with the don't like list. I talked about the budget steel. Don't really like the budget steel just because it's not something to brag about. I'll also say this knife had the dullest blade I have ever experienced. It was dull. Oh my God, it was dull. It was so dull. I'm not going to do it now because I sharpened it. But I was completely comfortable running, the live blade against my hand, against my fingers. There was just nothing there. Part of that is probably the inexpensive steel, combined with, I imagine, abuse and non-sharpening or bad sharpening. I have a separate video on sharpening this knife, just as an example of some sharpening techniques. I'm going to put just a quick clip from that video in right here, just to have some fun with how amazingly dull this knife is. Here's that other video. The other issue with this knife is it's dull, but I mean dull. My God, I don't think I have ever experienced a knife that was so dull. This is duller than the current season of Grey's Anatomy. I mean, it's that dull. Let me show you what I mean. A standard easy way to check the sharpness of a knife, here's a sharp knife, is lightly scrape it sideways against your thumbnail. Right? Now, don't press down. You don't want to cut through your thumbnail. Just lightly scrape it across the thumbnail. And the sharper the knife is, the more resistance you will feel. And you can hear it too. Let me put it near the microphone here. Microphone. Here, still trying to get the microphone. There we are. Now that's 0 pressure. I don't want to cut myself. But if I go to something which is not sharp, like the backside, you get smooth like steel on glass. So there's a first basic test of whether a blade is sharp. So this one, I may as well be doing the back of the blade. I mean, there is just nothing there. This thing is so dull, I'm actually comfortable touching the live surface of the blade. There's just nothing there. Final test. Here, we'll get a piece of paper. I'm not even going to do the suspended, unsupported paper thing. We'll just take a piece of paper, do there's a sharpness test. Let me take this one. Nothing. I could sort of tear the paper if I work on it. Oh my God, it's dull. And we're back. So sharpened it up. It's sharp now, but it's not going to stay sharp. That's just not what this steel does. Next dislike. There's a weird thing about the geometry of the blade and the pivot here. And I've seen this in a few knives, but not many. In this knife, it rotates, right? So there's an area of blade in there that rotates and has washers on it and has lubrication on it. Now, unfortunately, that washer and lubricated area extends down this way a greater distance than there is there. That means there's when the knife is closed, this part of the blade is in there and it's running on lubrication. And when I open the knife, that folds out into the open air. And so this edge of knife that has come out here has lube on it. There you can see some there. There's a little bit of grease there, a little bit of lube there. So naturally, what I'm tempted to do is wipe it off because I don't want it to attract grit. And then when I close the knife, this piece of knife that is now rotating out into view has lube on it. So there it is. So I clean it off. And I open the knife, and there's more lube here, so I clean it off. So what I'm doing is pumping the lubrication out of the inner mechanism of the knife. So I'm not sure whether, is there too much? There's more. Is there too much, and it just doesn't handle excess lube well? Or what I suspect is that I am emptying the mechanism of lubrication, and I'm going to have to re-lubricate it again. That seems like a weird design. If I just compare it to something else, and here's one. Everything that is inside now is inside when the knife is open. So the lubrication stays inside where it belongs. Fortunately, I've already rated this knife, and I rated it as an A on the cut myself rating, because if I was doing it now, I'd have to give it a B, because I just nicked myself on the blade from being stupid. So that's weird geometry. The other weird thing, now, it's all of the SpyderCo knives that I have, and I don't have very many, have this. Because they have the 4-point clip mounting, that means there are holes up here over the pivot area. Well, if I look down in that hole, I get a light. So here's the holes that are over the pivot. If I look down in there, I can actually see the washers. So those holes which are there as mounting points for the clip, they are also openings into the knife's inner mechanism. I can see the phosphor bronze washers down there. So that's going to, over time, that's a path for grit to get into the inside of the knife. Pocket lint and sand and bird droppings and earwigs are going to get in those holes and build up around the washers. And that's really weird. Now, as I say, other SpyderCo knives have it. You can see them here too, but it's smaller. And if I look down in these holes in the PM2, I only see steel. I'm looking at the knife, yes, at the blade, but I'm not looking at washer. This is the only one I've got where I'm actually seeing lubricated washer surfaces, and I'm being invited to get stuff in there to mess up and pollute that lubrication. So that seems weird. Now the good news, by the way, is that I can also use these as lubrication points. I could take a fine micro oiler, and I can use that as a way to get oil easily into the inner mechanism. So that's a nice solution to my concern that it's going to leak oil through that pumping mechanism. It's easy to get more in there. And as long as it's clean in there, that's fine. But when this starts to become a source for grit getting into the inner mechanism, I'm going to take it apart and clean it. So anyway, all of that seems weird. Next, G10. G10's okay, but G10 distorts. So as I said, the clip used to be up here, and I moved it to down here, and you can see, there we are, I've got a flat spot on the, there we are, on the scales where the clip used to be. The mounting screw pressure pushed the clip down and pushed the texturing away, flattened the G10 out. So you're going to move your clip on your G10 SpyderCo knife, and then you need to remember to say, that's going to leave a mark. Finally, yeah, this will be finally. Here's a hot spot. I said it was comfortable to hold, and it is, but there is a hot spot, and that is right here. The edge of the G10 scale is sharp. It's actually beveled, so it's noticeably sharp, and that's where my finger rests. And it's hurting. And over time, that would hurt. I would not want to have to hold this tight for a long time. So, small hot spot. So that's a lot of dislikes. Sorry about that, SpyderCo fans. Maybe it is just me convincing myself that my knives that cost 10 times as much are worth it. That's certainly possible. This really is an okay budget knife, as long as you remember that that's what it is. So, what it isn't, however, is an NTGK, a non-threatening gentleman's knife. Let's go through that rating. We'll do NT, non-threatening, and then GK, gentleman's knife. So for NT, non-threatening, the good news is you can open it slowly. And if you're in the company of really nervous people, you can open it two-handed. Those are good things. That reduces the threat. Okay. The bad news is everything else. It's big. Okay. It doesn't look like a gentleman's knife. It looks like a knife. It's got this ugly, fat, tactical-looking blade. Overall, it's got a tactical-looking appearance. It looks like it was designed to hurt things, not to cut open office boxes. I thought about rating it a little higher overall because of the slow open, but I thought, no, it's a threatening-looking knife. The fact that I open it slowly doesn't make it look less threatening. If this was the Crocodile Dundee, Bowie knife, taking it out slowly doesn't make it look any less threatening. So I'm going to give it a C for non-threatening. As a gentleman's knife, the good is I can't think of anything. The bad is it's big. Okay, it's long, it's thick, it's heavy. So when it sits on the edge of the pocket of your dress pants, it really weighs them down. And it's obvious there's something there because the shallow carry clip is bright chrome and hideous. It's very conspicuous. And it has unexotic materials, unexotic steel and black plastic scales. So I'm going to give it a C as well as a gentleman's knife. So as an NTGK, overall, a C. Now, how about a KN rating? KN would be, what do my knife nerd friends think of this knife? Well, the good is, it's good value. It's an inexpensive entry into the SpyderCo line. It has a pleasant mechanism to work and a good lock. Those are all good things. The bad is, it's cheap steel and cheap materials. It's heavy. It's functional but unimpressive mechanism. It's not a flicky mechanism, and it's not a drop-shutty mechanism, but it's okay. If there was, this is a knife nerd rating. I'm going to say my knife nerd friends would give it a C. Now, if there was a value nerds rating, it would do well. They'd like that. This is a good value knife. I think it's not as good as, whoops, that's not it. Not as good as the Ontario Rat 2, because it's got that lovely flicking mechanism that is just a real pleasure to work with. A surprisingly good mechanism for an inexpensive knife. These are about the same price. Nicer mechanism, nicer build, more elegant, almost gentlemanly. This one is none of those things, but arguably a sturdier knife to actually cut things with. So a C is a KN. And finally, the CMR, cut myself rating. Well, I've never cut myself with this knife, so I'm going to give it an A. Now, I did just cut myself a while ago while describing this knife, but I cut myself with a different knife, so it's not going to hurt this guy's rating. It's going to be an A. So in summary, this is an entry-level budget knife. It's a good knife to recommend to somebody who thinks you're crazy for what you spend on knives. It's a particularly good entry point for somebody who thinks SpyderCos look cool, which they don't. It's a good knife to loan people, because if it comes back wet or damaged or doesn't come back, I won't be heartbroken. I have a couple of other budget knives in my collection. This is the big, robust, worky-looking one, and there's a place for that. It's also a good example that basic, simple knives can be had as is for cheap, and generally they can be restored to good condition with some simple maintenance, maybe a part replacement. And it also helps you better appreciate the design and materials of higher-end knives after you've used an entry level. I certainly appreciate the PM2 in a lot of ways more after handling the Tenacious. So probably every collector should have of high ends, should have a couple of low ends to keep the baseline in perspective. Anyway, thanks for following along, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.